Today's episode is sponsored by the NBA and their quest to advance the game of basketball. Two different things. They want to grow the community and impact culture. The league celebrates its teams, players, and fans across the past, present, and future as part of its 75th anniversary season. 75, T-Rock. Wow.
Wow, it's getting up there, the NBA. It's getting up there in years, but it's still as competitive as ever. And I do appreciate that it is even more competitive than basketball. That's Game is the thing we're talking about today. That's Game highlights pivotal moments on court and beyond, from iconic plays in arenas to the impact players have in the community. That's the NBA. That's the Game.
That's Game indeed. Like, Tate, I don't know if you're watching those NBA finals, like when the Bucks had their backs against the wall, Drew Holiday steals the ball, he pushes the break, alley-oop to Giannis for an iconic slam dunk. It sounds weird in a British accent, all this, I'm sorry, but he sealed Game 5 an eventual title there. That's the NBA. That's Game. Do you love yourself some hoops, Taylor? Do you love shooting on the driveway with a little, hoop out there?
On the driveway. I love Allen Iverson. That is my answer to that question. I do feel like the NBA should have more British commentators, and they should be wearing like spats and monocles, because it sounds very like sophisticated when Ryan Bailey is doing the play-by-play. And I feel like that's another wrinkle we could add. Maybe that's another game that Game could add. This is more than just basketball. It's what connects us all and keeps us coming back for more. That's the NBA. That's Game. Benvenuto and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I think I said hello and welcome and welcome. My name is Taylor Rockwell. Joining me today to preview the upcoming Serie A season, which kicks off this weekend, is our old pal David Amoyal. David, thank you so much for being here.
It's a real pleasure, Taylor, to be back on your show. We've done a few of these, and I'm humbled to still be part of it. So great to talk to you, and good afternoon, buon pomeriggio, buona mattina, buonasera, depending on when you're hearing this to all the listeners.
Yours sounded slightly more authentic, if I'm being honest. I appreciate your willingness to be here. I appreciate your willingness to be peppered with a bunch of questions. We have Manuel Vates, who does this for our sort of Bundesliga coverage, where I can ask him basically anything about any topic, and he seems to have an answer. For people who are new to the show, David is very much the same when it comes to Serie A. I have many questions because it feels like it's been a weird summer and will be a weird start to the season. But first, we haven't spoken since Italy won the Euros. How was your summer with that in mind?
Superb. I have to say, Taylor, the Euro reminded me as to why, I fell in love with this sport. I think, especially the past year or two, covering a lot of transfers and, agent commissions, profits, players leaving maybe under not the best of circumstances made me pretty cynical. And I have to say, watching Italy's run at the Euro kind of reminded me why I love this sport so much. And I've been following Italy in tournaments since the late 80s. I can't remember a time where so many people actually liked Italy. I felt like they were everyone's kind of second favorite team. They were rated highly going into the tournament. I thought they played really well. I thought they absolutely deserved to win. So, it was definitely great. It was also a period where things were looking, pretty safe. I got to go out and really enjoy it around other fans. So, no, I have to say it was awesome to see them win, but it really reminded me of why I love this sport so much.
And we are going to talk about maybe the things you love less, like transfers, contracts, weird agent fees, all that type of thing. Let's stay with Italy for a moment, because you obviously have a lot of knowledge when it comes to that squad. Had it before the tournament, have it after the tournament. But was there anybody that particularly stood out to you as being surprising? Not necessarily that they were included, but just that they performed the way they did, that they fit in as well as they did, or overall, was it sort of the Italy team that you've come to expect?
It's a great question. So I don't know why I want to start with Chiellini and Bonucci, which is maybe counterintuitive. But, these are two guys, if you're really plugged in with Italian football, people that people that aren't Juve fans tend not to like Juve. And one of the big criticism was like, oh, Chiellini and Bonucci are bullies. They win in Italy, but the minute they leave Italy, they can't win, which is probably not fair considering they were in 2 Champions Leagues final. But for them to have the tournament that they did, especially Chiellini, at his age, and I think people really saw the personality of Chiellini, what a great guy he is. So I know it's a little counterintuitive, but that's really what jumps out at me. I thought Jorginho, a player that, in a lot of ways is pretty controversial. There's a lot of people that don't rate him. I think the fact that, he's won so many trophies this year, I thought was really a great vindication for him. But the guy that surprised me, and unfortunately he was injured, was Spinazzola, who I thought, had he stayed healthy, he would have been up there with Donnarumma and Bonucci as the player of the tournament for Italy. And then I thought too Locatelli, played really well when he was starting. I think in retrospect, it sounds maybe a little crazy that there was a debate if he should start over Verratti when Verratti came back, because Verratti is obviously one of the highest profile Italian players. So I think Locatelli certainly made a name for himself. So those are, and I thought Donnarumma, absolutely put himself on the map as one of the best keepers in the world, and potentially as someone that we could be talking in 10, 15 years as Donnarumma maybe being one of the greatest keepers ever. So I think for a lot of players it was kind of a coronation, but the real surprises for me were Spinazzola and Locatelli.
And you mean Antonio Donnarumma, right? Of course. No, not him? Not the older brother so much? No. All right, fine. I like that it was a sort of steady, calm Italy side coached by Roberto Mancini, because that feels very much at odds with the upcoming Serie A season, where I feel like we usually have at least a few teams that are pretty consistent, pretty steady. We kind of know what we're going to get from them. We have a couple of those this time round, but we have Antonio Conte leaving Inter, Simone Inzaghi taking over, leaving Lazio, being replaced by Maurizio Sarri, Max Allegri taking over at Juve, Luciano Spalletti back with Napoli. There have been a lot of changes. That's just a few. I have more questions about the managerial turnover. Is it just the case that everybody needed a refresh, or is this sort of a domino effect? Why do you feel like we've seen such a big shakeup, such a big kind of change in the maybe top half of the table when it comes to managers?
It's a great question. And look, while there may not have been a lot of fireworks for incoming transfers in Serie A for players, certainly that was not the case for managers. It's a great question because, look, in Italy, the shelf life for a manager is typically pretty short. It's rare for a manager to stay even past 2-3 seasons everywhere. And it just felt like a lot of teams were looking, to do a reset. I think, there were different reasons. I think, Inter's financial situation, it made it very hard for Conte to stay. I think now when we saw what happened afterwards, he looks pretty justified in leaving the way he did. I think, Juve, they were hoping that Pirlo would work out, and it didn't. So they went with a sure thing with Allegri. So, it's very interesting. I think Roma, they had new owners. When they first arrived, they went with some continuity with Fonseca. It was a matter of time until they were going to make their mark. And I think Lazio would have been very happy to keep Simone Inzaghi. They were ready to offer him a new contract. It looked like they were going to keep him. And then Inter convinced them to go. And now you got to wonder how he feels about that decision with Lukaku leaving after. So, I think it's a great question. I think there were a lot of small things that culminated in all this. And look, at the end of the day, of the top teams in the league, of the top 7 teams in the league, everyone changed managers except for Milan and Atalanta. So, we're definitely a lot of changes.
So let's stay with Inter for a moment because they win the title. Antonio Conte is happy, or as happy as he can be. The squad is strong. Now they have lost Romelu Lukaku. They've sold Achraf Hakimi as well. I think that would be 180 million euros to spend, except the reports are that they're only going to be allowed to spend about 35 million of that. It does seem like it's a pretty bleak situation over there. Is it as bleak as it seems when you start looking at those numbers? And how big of an impact do you think that will have on their ability to compete for top 4 this season?
I have to say I'm probably more optimistic about Inter than most. But look, there's no doubt about it. Lukaku was the best player in Serie A last season. He's gone. Hakimi, we haven't had a wing back quite like that in Italy. I compare his impact a little bit to when Salah arrived in Italy and absolutely took the league by storm. Conte, I think, is the best manager in Italy. Allegri would make a case for sure, but Conte is a massive loss. So I totally get, you look at Inter, and then you add to that what happened with Eriksen, which unfortunately they couldn't have, predicted. So they had that terrible situation. They were already in a horrible financial situation. So they find themselves also having to replace Eriksen on top of that. But all things considered, I think Inter has done as good a job as you could have done with the financial constraints. Their executive director, Beppe Marotta, was the main architect of Juve's success of the past 10 years. I think we've seen since he left Juve, it certainly has not been the same. Juve was always described as brilliant on the transfer market. Now, maybe not so much. And I think Marotta deserves a lot of credit. I see some themes. I think they said, okay, we had a winning formula at Inter with this 3-5-2, very solid defensively. They had the best defense in Serie A last season. They conceded the least amount of goals. That whole unit is coming back. Typically in Italy, if you give up the least amount of goals, you win the Scudetto. There's been some exceptions, but it's pretty rare. Inzaghi is the most similar coach to Conte out there in style and interpretation of football. So to me, that made a ton of sense to bring him in. Dumfries, who we saw at the Euro, I thought he was pretty impressive on the Dutch team. He does have a little reminiscent of Hakimi. So I think Inter looked a lot and were like, listen, we have this winning formula. Let's see if we can bring it back as much as possible. I think of one of last of Conte's quotes before he left Inter is he goes, look, now the players know what it takes to win. We showed them what they need to do. And I think in Inter's mind is like, okay, yeah, we have this horrible financial situation. We don't have the money to reinvent the wheel by bringing a different manager. Let's try to keep it as similar as possible. They bring in Zeko. They're looking to bring in another striker to help make up for Lukaku. Now, I clearly don't think they are on Juve's level, but I would also say I'd be really quite surprised if they don't finish in the top four. And I think had you told someone at the beginning of the summer you're going to lose Conte, Lukaku, Hakimi, and Eriksen's not, most likely not going to be available, you would say Inter's in trouble. And I think even Çalhanoğlu, who is a player, that's pretty controversial. Some people rate him, some people don't. They bring him in real fast to help replace Eriksen. No transfer fee. I think he makes sense in that midfield. So, if I had to pick, I think Juve are the favorites. If you told me Inter are the favorites to be runner-ups, I wouldn't disagree.
It's always risky when I start a statement/question without really knowing where I'm going to go with it. But I'm going to do that here because I'm really glad that you sort of said what you said about Inter, because looking at what they have done, the business all makes sense, or at least it mostly makes sense in terms of what they have to do in terms of selling the players. But also Lukaku leaves, as you said, Dzeko arriving, Hakimi departs, Matteo Darmian brought in on a permanent, I think Dental Dumfries, as you said, as well. And you can see how they're sort of balancing the team. I had, honestly, I'm being totally honest, forgotten what had happened to Christian Eriksen. It's been a very long summer. And I read like Hakan Çalhanoğlu was brought in to be like to be a replacement option for Christian Eriksen. And I was sort of like, oh, I guess they're going for depth. Like, I kind of completely forgot. Yeah. So again, that move starts to make more sense. And then they clear off some of the wages with Ashley Young, Raja Nangolan, Gian Mario, to name a few. And it does seem like basically if they hadn't won the title last year in the way they did with the personnel they did, if this were an Inter team that finished fourth and had sacked their manager and now Inzaghi is inheriting this team, I think it's a more optimistic picture. So it's definitely like a less strong squad, but I think maybe reports of their demise are slightly overblown.
No, I totally agree with that.
All right, cool. I'm glad I went in that direction. Then I'm going to take us into a much more nuanced direction, because I would like you, if you can, to explain, I don't even know how to say his name fully, Zinho van Heusden? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Can you explain what is happening there? So he has been signed on a permanent, but then loaned out. But before that, he was with the Standard Liège Academy. Then he goes to the Inter Academy. He makes the Inter team, senior team. Then he gets loaned to Standard Liège, bought by Standard Liège, and now he's been bought back by Inter to immediately be loaned out to, I believe, Genoa. I don't understand, David. Can you make it make sense?
Well, there are some transactions that I think favor much more accounts than they do coaches sometimes. And look, I've heard Van Hudson. I've actually heard some pretty good things about him. I'm curious to actually see him play at Genoa. This is a player that Inter moved for what maybe thought was an inflated number. Then they bring him back. So, what people need to remember with transfer fees is every time you sell a player, you record, the profit on it right away for that year. So you get an infusion of cash. But when you buy a player, you get to spread out the payment over the life of the contract. So to me, Van Hudson, there are other examples of players, but he's probably the most egregious one being moved around for these numbers. And now we're actually going to get to see him play in Serie A. So, yeah, I think he's one of those where it's probably more an accounting move than a sporting one.
That makes a lot of sense because I was very confused as to why a club that are going to be cash strapped, are going to have to be very frugal with how they're spending, would sign a center back to then immediately loan him out. But if there are sort of calculations to be done away from the spotlight, now I'm understanding a bit more. Is that a way that Inter, you think, will be able to kind of function at an even higher level, is by using some of that creative accounting, that creative bookkeeping?
Well, look, Serie A as a whole, as a league, has losses and a deficit somewhat comparable. Like Barcelona by themselves is more than a Serie A, but it's not that far off. And Italian clubs have been able to survive with the plusvalenza, which is one of the words I'm really known for. It's basically the profit that you make on a player above what he's worth on your books for that year. And look, we've seen a lot of these. We've seen Juve, the Arthur Pjanic swap, and now there's rumors that maybe Pjanic's going to come back on loan at Juve. There are these deals with these numbers that, are recorded in a certain way. And we've also saw this Locatelli deal where Juve is not putting any money up front at all. They are going to start paying this in a few years when they don't have Ronaldo on the books. And, a lot of these clubs in Italy do a lot of business with one another. And sometimes it's like, okay, I'll scratch your back this time. I might need some money on my books next transfer window. Remember this favor that I did to you. So I think there's a lot of that. And look, this happens in a lot of places, in a lot of businesses. I think in Italy, they are the most brazen, and honest is maybe not the right word, but it's really out in the open. So yeah, that's how they roll.
Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius, who would like to remind you that summer's almost over and responsibility is about to rear its head. That is how I felt this weekend with the start of the Premier League season and the Bundesliga and La Liga and many other leagues. It felt like, the summer that we didn't really have is now over, and now it's time to get serious. And if you want to get serious about maybe getting life insurance, then that's where Policy Genius can help.
They can indeed, Taylor. And by the way, I felt responsibility throughout the summer with all the soccer we had, but that's another story altogether. I get what Policy Genius is trying to say here. Policy Genius, they make it easy to compare quotes from over a dozen top insurers all in one place. Why compare, Taylor? Why compare? I'll tell you why. You could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius, and you could save $1,300 dues or more per year on life insurance by using Policy Genius to compare policies.
Polices. Ryan, where does dollary dues come from?
It's a Simpsons reference. It's what the Australians call their dollars.
Of course,
$900 dues for a reverse charge call.
I love you so much, Ryan. And I love Policy Genius because they make this process very easy. The licensed experts at Policy Genius work for you, not the insurance companies, so you can trust them to help you navigate every step of the shopping and buying process. 5-star service, Ryan Bailey. So say all of their reviews.
5-star reviews, Taylor. Thousands of them on Trustpilot and Google. Count them up. Taylor. And eligible applicants can get covered in as little as a week thanks to award-winning policy options that swap the standard medical exam and requirements for a simple phone call. So if I wanted to get it started, Taylor, with Policy Genius, what steps should I take?
Well, I will say, first of all, the process of getting started is easy. You head to policygenius.com. In minutes, you can work out how much life insurance coverage you need and compare personalized quotes to find your best price. When you're ready to apply, the Policy Genius team will handle the paperwork and the scheduling for free. They don't add on any extra fees, so they won't be forcing you to pay many, many dollary dues.
No extra dollary dues here, mates. Head to policygenius.com to get started right now. That's policygenius.com. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to get it right.
G'day. This episode of the Total Soccer Show is brought to you by Heineken. To be a hardcore soccer fan, we know that it takes strength, commitment, and a completely obliterated sleep schedule with CONCACAF Champions League and the UEFA Champions League playing on the same date, many hours apart. That is definitely the case. But no matter what time that alarm is set for kickoff, Heineken is here to watch with you. Heineken Original Lager is made of 100% natural ingredients with pure malt and their famous A yeast. So whether you're zealously up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday watching Premier League games or up late for a West Coast MLS kickoff, you can stay refreshed with the crisp, balanced taste of Heineken. And if you're a West Coast listener, then maybe it's a 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. kickoff. But either way, Heineken is still there. So grab a six-pack from your local retailer or get one delivered to you, ideally from somewhere open 24 hours, again, if you're up late or up early watching games. You must be 21 years of age or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. Thank you very much to Heineken for sponsoring today's show. Do you have a favorite singular move that has happened this season so far in Serie A? Or maybe broader, do you have a team that you think has done particularly good business across the board?
I would have to say Roma. And look, new signings are obviously much sexier and more fun, and they've had a few intriguing ones. They've had a real liability at keeper since Alisson left. I think Rui Patricio is certainly solid, better than what they've had. They replaced Spinazzola quickly, who got injured with Vigna. I've heard some good things about him. Tammy Abraham, I've always been a fan of his. I think he'll do. I'm very intrigued to see how he does. But what really impressed me about Roma is they had so many players that they had out on loan, coming back, players on their squad that did work out. I mean, they had probably the most bloated squad in Serie A going into the season. And their sporting general manager, Thiago Pinto, arrived last year. I think did an amazing job cleaning that up, moving so many players. They've shed a ton of wages. And in this financial environment, being able to do that, I think, is really quite remarkable. And look, I think Roma, Mourinho's a pretty big X factor. I could see them being anywhere between second and seventh place, but the degree of difficulty of moving all those players can be underestimated. Mm-hmm. You have to appease a new manager like Mourinho that's pretty demanding, and I think he's pretty happy with what they've done. So if I had to pick one team, I would pick them.
Speaking of Jose, The Guardian had an article titled Jose Mourinho at Roma, a special coup or a gamble on nostalgia. I'm just going to steal that headline and turn it over to you to ask which one you think he is more likely to be, a special coup or a gamble on nostalgia.
Between the two, I would say more a gamble on nostalgia, but I think it can be a gamble that pays off. I think Mourinho obviously is not what he was like 5 years ago, but I think in Serie A, in that environment in Rome, I think that's a place where it might actually work out. Like I always say, people might think Juve, Milan, Inter are the most pressured jobs in Italy, but to me, it's clearly Roma. Like the passion in the city is really something else. They've really embraced him. I think the personality he has is absolutely perfect for the environment. At the beginning of this millennium, Roma brought in Capello, who had won a lot in the past, and he won a title at Roma. It didn't last very long. Now, I don't know if Mourinho can win a title, but you could talk me into this being Capello 2.0 too, but at the same time, it could also really, really go south. But no matter what, I think, if you're someone like me who covers Serie A, the fact that Mourinho's there is like one of the greatest Christmas gifts you're ever going to get. And look, we've seen all the fights and the preseason games, everything about Roma. I think the Friedkins deserve a lot of credit for the way Roma's just really entertaining. And I can tell that they've been in the movie business. Like, they know about narrative, storylines. I mean, Roma's just fascinating. I'm not surprised they were one of the first few teams you'd want to ask me about.
And I want to keep asking you sort of about them because we've lost Antonio Conte. We have Jose Mourinho there. Which managers do you think are most likely to get into a touchline fracas on the sidelines? Like, maybe there's just a little word. Maybe there's some frustration with the way the game is being played. But I feel like Jose Mourinho is in that conversation. Normally, I would say like Mourinho versus Conte feels like it's ripe for frustration. But who would you say this season with Conte departed?
I think it's going to be in the same town. I think Sarri and Mourinho, although they are trying to play it down. I mean, look, Sarri, people remember Sarri at Napoli. He was pretty blunt. Some people would say vulgar. And I think in some cases that would be fair. But, he also was he knew the city and the fan base he was representing. And we've seen Sarri really out of his element, both at Chelsea and Juve. I love Sarri. He's one of my favorite figures in Serie A. And I think Lazio is just a perfect club for him. Now, maybe the squad isn't ideal for him, but the size of the club, the attitude of the club fits really well. I think he's going to go back to being, more of himself there. I mean, the only thing that maybe not a mix is the politics. Like, Sarri is a well-known, very left-wing kind of guy. So let's see how that works out with the fan base. But him and Mourinho, I mean, I think the first derby in Rome, the press conferences are going to be really fun. Like, they've been pretty diplomatic with one another so far, but I think that's going to change. So I would pick them, but you're right. Had Conte stayed there, it would have been superb. Like, I remember the video when Conte was told that Mourinho was at Roma. Nobody expected that move to happen. It was out of the blue. His reaction was just superb. I think he probably knew that he was going to leave Inter, but maybe in the back of his mind would have been like, geez, this would have been fun had I stayed.
I want to ask you about Sarri and Lazio, but one more question about Roma first. Mourinho spoke of it being a long-term project. He noted that Roma has a lot of work to do to clean things up and get the team kind of functioning on and off the field. Edin Dzeko was a name that was consistently mentioned before he was let go as like being on a very high wage. They needed to clear off more players from the books. Who do you think they most need to kind of send out, maybe either on loan or on a permanent deal, but who could they stand to get rid of to reduce that wage bill?
Well, look, right now they are trying to get Florenzi to Milan. I think that will and then Pedro, who actually played for Sarri at Chelsea, is likely going to Lazio. So I think those two, as you mentioned, Dzeko. So look, I think they've done a great job there. And look, Roma has the advantage that Zaniolo's coming back. He didn't play at all last season. And I haven't seen any Serie A team add a player as impactful as Zaniolo coming back. So they have the ace up the sleeve. They can say, hey, we have the best new addition in Serie A with Zaniolo, and they've done a great job. So I think once Pedro and Florenzi move out, I mean, there's some other players like Robin Olsen, who hasn't even on their squad. Diarra, who's a promising young midfielder they might sell, but they've done a good job there. So I think Pedro and Florenzi are the last two.
And we do also have the young American Brian Reynolds at Roma. Do you expect him to get much time under Mourinho?
Possibly. I mean, Karsdorp, with Florenzi leaving, because he was kind of the backup to Karsdorp at right back, I actually think that could work out for Reynolds because Karsdorp is pretty injury prone. So, actually, I think Reynolds has a chance. We know Mourinho isn't crazy about playing younger players, especially on defense, but he really doesn't have too many other options. So the fact that Reynolds hasn't been loaned out and Roma has shown they are good at moving players that they want to get out is probably a good sign for him.
Maybe less of a good sign when it comes to Lazio is what you said earlier, which is that the club itself is perfect for Maurizio Sarri, maybe not the squad. It does seem like it will be a slightly different approach, and we know how that went for him when he took over Juve. Probably less pressure to kind of make things work at Lazio, but still plenty of pressure. What do you think needs to be done there, or how can Sarri go about making that team more in the mold that he wants it to be?
Yeah, so look, they're changing formation. Inzaghi played 3 at the back. Sarri's never done that. So he's going to have classic 4-man defense. They brought in Hizaj, who was one of his wingbacks at Empoli and Napoli. I think that could be okay. But, a lot of the other wingbacks that they have are more offensive-minded in a 3-5-2, so there's an issue there. They have Acerbi was their best defender, and I thought he did pretty well for the Euro for Italy in a 4-man defense. So, but, they really have no other reliable center back. Their midfield, Milinkovic-Savic, Luis Alberto, great. Lucas Leiva is getting older. Let's see if Sarri can get another season after him. In theory, that's actually a pretty good midfield for them. It'll be interesting to see what they do up front. I mean, they did bring back Felipe Anderson, who they had sold for a fortune to West Ham to bring him back basically for free. I think we need to come up with a name for when you do that. You sell a player for big money and then bring him back for nothing. So kudos for Lazio. That's a player Sarri wanted at Napoli, but who knows how much he wasn't really good in the Premier League. So we'll see there, and we'll have Pedro. Might be pretty intriguing as a kind of a super sub. But the other question, for Lazio is Immobile, because we saw Immobile in Inzaghi's system. You could write him in for 25 goals in Serie A and feel pretty confident that he could do it in Inzaghi's system. But then we saw Immobile play for Italy, and that Italy team was pretty inspired by Sarri's Napoli, and we kept saying Immobile is kind of a liability here. So that's the other question, is how is Immobile going to do there? So I always root for Sarri. I really want him to do well, but this is not going to be exactly easy for him with this team.
And it was Sarri's Napoli. It is now Luciano Spalletti's Napoli. How are you feeling about that appointment and the work to be done by him?
I think Napoli is very underrated. I'm not really into gambling, but I like looking at the odds just to get a sense of what the feeling is out there. I saw most places Napoli 12-1. That feels like really good value to me, because look, last season Napoli, we kept saying, okay, they're the third, maybe even second best squad in Serie A. I thought Gattuso was a good manager. I think Spalletti is a clear upgrade. Osimhen, who was the most expensive purchase in Napoli history, when he played, he was awesome, and he battled COVID, had some injuries. You look at Spalletti, strikers under him. Dzeko had his best season at Roma. Icardi, until he clashed with Spalletti, did great. If this time next year we are talking about Osimhen being the player in Serie A who has the highest value on the transfer market, that would make perfect sense to me. So look, they haven't really made any moves on the transfer market, and that can be good or bad. I mean, they really kind of needed a left back. It sounds like Emerson Palmieri won't be it. He would have been a nice move for them, but they still have a very solid defense, because the market, there's just no teams that have money. With them not making the Champions League last year, we would have said, okay, Koulibaly, Fabian Ruiz, Insigne, maybe all these players are gone, but the fact that hardly anyone has money on transfers, all these players are still at Napoli. So, with Inter and Atalanta, I would say those are Juve, Inter, Atalanta, and Napoli, to me, are clearly the top 4 in Serie A. And I could see Inter doing quite well. Spalletti really is one of the best managers in Serie A, and I think he can do really well here.
You sort of just answered my question there about Spalletti, but yeah, how is he perceived in Italy and Serie A? Because I think he first kind of comes So prominence for me, when I first become aware of him, is in his first stint at Roma, then he's at Zenit, then he's back at Roma, then Inter and Napoli. But before that, plenty of other clubs in Italy, and he's a manager who seems to bounce around a little bit, never seems to get that much attention outside of Italy, but also seems like maybe he should.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think Spalletti is, elite, maybe right below elite managers in Serie A. This is the guy that brought Inter back to the Champions League. I think, had Inter not had the opportunity to sign Conte, it was clearly better. He might even still be there. Spalletti, is known for being a fairly offensive-minded manager for Italian standards. He's also known for someone who's not afraid to get in the face of certain players. Like him and Totti clashed quite a bit. They had a big series, a TV series in Italy on Totti, where Spalletti was kind of the villain. At Inter, Icardi leaves. Like between Spalletti and Marotta, their director, they handled that situation. And in retrospect, they did really well with that Icardi sale. Now at Napoli, there's maybe rumors that maybe Insigne won't stay. And so people are like, oh, this is Spalletti, not afraid to get in people's faces. So look, I was a pretty big fan of Gattuso, but I certainly would rather have Spalletti. I look at their squad. He likes to play that 4-2-3-1 style. I think it checks a lot of boxes. Like Lozano last season really, really came on. I think it was a very inspired hiring by De Laurentiis to bring in Spalletti at Napoli.
Having just asked you about the impressions of one manager, I will ask you about another. You just mentioned him, Gattuso. Brought in by Fiorentina, that lasted, less than a month. He was in the conversation for the Tottenham job. That did not go well. What is the perception of Gattuso as a manager? Because he has never been one that seemed to me like he was this sort of tactical tinkerer. He was bringing a lot of innovation. It seemed like what he was as a player is what he is as a manager, but that's very much, to me, an outsider.
Yeah, look, I think Gattuso is a pretty controversial player because obviously he was a very manager. He was a very iconic player. I think people really liked him as a player, the grinta, that determination that he had. I think, his press conferences, he's always been incredibly honest and passionate. But at the same time, Napoli really were in the driver's seat to make the Champions League last season. Going into the second half of the last game, they were in. They can't win against Verona, who had absolutely nothing to play for. I think there was a lot of disappointment with how the season ended at Napoli. Then, this thing with Fiorentina was really weird. I have to say my initial reaction was maybe siding with Gattuso because I remembered, at Milan, he was under contract. He resigned. He left money on the table. That's extremely rare for a manager to do. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But then you hear a lot of reports that, his agent was Mendes. And when Mendes brought him to Fiorentina, it was with the understanding that then Mendes would kind of be running their transfer market. And they were linked to a lot of Mendes players. And the other side of the story is Commisso didn't want to play that game. So I got to be honest, the more I learned, the more I was maybe more on the side of Commisso. Like they're trying not to talk too much about this publicly. But look, I think Fiorentina bounced back pretty well. They got Italiano was a revelation at Spezia. It's interesting that Gattuso, has no club right now. There's actually quite a long list of big name managers that were in Serie A that are out of a job. With Spurs, it's kind of weird how didn't work out there. It seems he's very, entrenched with his agent Mendes right now.
Sticking with Fiorentina, you mentioned Vincenzo Italiano being brought over from Spezia. I saw him called in various ways like the next big thing in Italian coaching. What's his story? Why is he so exciting?
Yeah, so Italiano was a fairly popular former player, more on lower table teams, was a regista type like Pirlo. He had done very well at Spezia and Serie B last season when Spezia came to Serie A. I think everyone, including me, thought they had no chance at all to stay in Serie A. They didn't have many players with Serie A experience, had a bunch of players on loan, and they played brilliantly. They played one of the most offensive styles in Italy. They convincingly avoided relegation. You know, he's kind of like the new version of De Zerbi, who now is at Shakhtar and already getting amazing reviews for his work at Shakhtar, which really doesn't surprise me that much. So I got to give credit to Commisso and Fiorentina. Now, granted, Italiano and Gattuso couldn't be more different tactically. So maybe it's not like, hey, Fiorentina was like, this is what we want our team to look like. But, you know, they worked out a deal to bring in Italiano real fast after Gattuso left. So it's pretty intriguing. I think Fiorentina could be interesting team. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty on Vlahovic, which would be another really big shame if Serie A loses him, but they have an intriguing squad. And I would say of all the managers that Commisso has had, you know, he's had Montella, Iachini, Prandelli, either Gattuso or Italiano were going to be a massive step up on those. But Fiorentina is a team that historically likes to play attractive football and be fun, and I think Italiano absolutely checks that box.
Today's episode is sponsored by Artifact. Question: have you ever heard your mum or dad tell a story and thought, wow, there's still so much I don't know about your life? I certainly know that's the case for me. And if that's the case for you, I'd like to introduce you to Artifact. Taylor, tell us more about Artifact, and also tell us whether you like someone starting a sentence with the word question.
I mean, at least I know what's coming. If it was a question followed by a statement, then I don't really enjoy that. But I do really enjoy Artifact because it is the best way to capture the life story of someone you love, like a parent or a grandparent. And yeah, like you can have those stories that pop up every now and then where your parent will be like, oh, did I never tell you that time that like I met your father in Germany, which is the thing that actually happened? And I said no, and then I heard that story. But you can also, it doesn't just have to be parents. It could be your own story. It could be about maybe your kids or anything else you want it to be. But it's a way to kind of preserve a memory, but in a more detailed way than a sort of haphazard story that maybe you half remembered and half wrote down. It is recorded for posterity and done professionally as well.
It is indeed. If you're wondering if this concept sounds great, but what does it actually feel like? What does it sound like? We've got some finished products you can listen to. There's a sample of Artifact that you can share. We're going to share publicly in the show notes of this ep. It's two sisters, Taylor, talking about the elder sister's bat mitzvah, and it has all the hallmarks of a great Artifact. Heartfelt, funny, ends with the elder sister doing a Whitney Houston impression as she belts out the greatest love of all. Aww, that sounds good.
That's a big impression to go for. If you're trying to, like, if you are actually singing a song and you're going a Whitney Houston song, like, that's a woman that Kevin Costner fell in love with. Such was her talent. I'm choosing to believe that's a real story.
I didn't say it was a good impression. I said it was an impression.
Okay. All right. Well, you'll have to listen to see if it is. But if you wanted to do your own, maybe not Whitney Houston impression, but your own Artifact, you go to heyartifact.com, choose the type of interview you'd like to do. They've got a bunch of different options so you can create your own. Artifact makes it super easy to book your interview on their website. They don't make it super easy to look good. The interview lasts about half an hour, and you can do it over the phone.
Artifact is your shortcut to creating something you'll keep coming back to year after year, and you don't have to take my year after year, and you don't have to take my word for it. The Wirecutter named Artifact to its list of the best gifts for families. Tell you what, ladies and gents, I should say, if you use the code TSS, you're going to save yourself 40 bones on your first purchase. I've got another word for dollary dues. It's bones.
I was going to say.
You save yourself $40 on your first purchase. You get started at heyartifact.com. That's HEYARTIFACT.com. $40 off your first one, Taylor. Sounds good to me.
Thank you to Artifact for sponsoring today's show. It sounds good to me, and I appreciate them saving our listeners all those many dollary dues. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Today, many small business owners are busier than ever. Time spent searching for and interviewing the wrong candidates for a job opening could be time better spent growing a business. That is definitely true. Ryan, are you doing a lot of time on LinkedIn looking for job interviews and the like?
I'm all about growth, Tate. I'm about growing businesses. I'm about growing my LinkedIn profile as well. It's really cool. I've really gotten into it in the past year or so, actually. LinkedIn is how it's pronounced by the pros, as you know. I'm actually doing a little bit of work for a company on LinkedIn at the moment as well. They're called Red Knot Communications. Please look them up and boost their stats for me. That's wonderful. But it's a really, really, really good platform for professionals. And if you want to create a job post, Tate, it's very good for that too. You can do it in literal minutes. You can reach your network and beyond on the world's largest professional network. There's over 750 million people on there, Taylor. And you can, if you want to place a job there, you can focus on candidates with the skills and experience you need. You can use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified people. It's just wonderful, Taylor. I can't talk well enough. I can't talk at all. I can't say anything better about it, I should say.
Well, I'll say this. Like, we do now live in a world where so many people are working remotely, working from home. And I think a lot of the hiring process, in my experience in the past, was who do I want to spend 40 hours a week with in an office space, and who can I tolerate the most? When you are going virtual, when you don't have as many in-person things, then you can open it up to, well, who is just the best candidate wherever they might be, and LinkedIn allows you to do that, as Ryan said. That network of 750 million people, by my calculations, 750 million is a lot of people. So I think that gives you a pretty broad base to work from, and certainly more than you would if you were just putting out like classifieds in the local paper. Put it that way.
LinkedIn Jobs, the headline, Taylor, is it helps you find the candidates worth interviewing much faster. And you can also find Taylor Rockwell's profile where he looks fabulous in his second-hand car salesman suit. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Visit your job for free at linkedin.com/TSS. One more time, Taylor. What's that address?
LinkedIn.com/TSS to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Thank you very much to LinkedIn for sponsoring today's show. Ryan, I'm going to change my LinkedIn profile to just me in a t-shirt with a sign that just says something disparaging about Ryan Bailey. How do you feel about that?
I've got many t-shirts that say something disparaging about Ryan Bailey. I'll lend you one.
Perfect. I like it. All right, we have made it probably as far as we can before being legally obligated to talk about Juve. Not a ton to report on the transfer front. The biggest news is the return of Max Allegri. The club is on its third manager in 3 years. Hasn't really had stability since Allegri was last in charge from 2014 to 2019. How do you think he feels about the squad he's inheriting? Who are the names you think could most benefit from him taking over and being back in charge? And maybe who are the ones who you think could least benefit? Let's start with, how do you think he feels about this squad in its present incarnation?
I don't think he would have come back because Allegri certainly had a market outside of Italy. So I think he must feel pretty good about the squad. I think what you mentioned is important. I think he sees, okay, Sarri didn't work out, Pirlo didn't work out. People were like, when Allegri was there, yeah, he wins, but geez, does it have to be this boring and this pragmatic and this cynical as football? And then you have Sarri and Pirlo, and then Juve fans are like, wait a second, we kind of missed those 1-0 games that we won all the time with Allegri. So I think in that sense, I think he's happy. And look, Juve still, especially with the departures at Inter, they have the best squad. I was actually thinking right before we started recording, I was kind of doing some mental math. I was like, I think Juve probably has a payroll. Last season, it was 80 million more than Inter, which is kind of like shocking. I think that gap has actually gone up. So it's like, geez, if you can't win with this, there's a problem. But I think, Allegri, after Juve finishing fourth last season, before there was the obsession with the Champions League, I think seeing how the transfer market is, it's not even really a question. I don't think there's any Juve fan that's like, well, if Allegri doesn't win the Champions League, it's bust. I think for now, the people are going to be very happy if Juve wins the Scudetto again. So seeing the circumstances, I think Allegri's got to be very happy with what he's getting back at Juve after a 2-year absence.
And are there any players in that 2-year absence that maybe have been on the outside looking in you expect to be brought back into the plans for the season?
It's a good question. Well, look, I'm not surprised that Allegri really wanted to bring in a Locatelli, who I think makes a ton of sense for Juve. They were kind of lacking a player with those attributes. Allegri keeps saying he's going to focus a lot on Dybala, but, to be fair, Sarri had said that too, and under Sarri, Dybala won MVP in Serie A, but I think Juve is really into relaunching Dybala more for life after Ronaldo, after this upcoming season. So I think you're going to see a lot of focus on him. I think Chiesa, after this Euro, is, maybe we're going to start talking about Juve being Chiesa's team. And look, he loves his wing backs as well. I thought Cuadrado was one of Juve's three best players last season. I think he will continue to be. I think in the midfield, Bentancur is probably happy that Allegri's back. He had played his best football there. And Allegri has challenged McKennie to score 10 goals this season. I think McKennie could be quite intriguing in that midfield. I think McKennie, Locatelli, Rabiot, if I had to guess, that's probably going to be a lot of what we see. I think McKennie could have a really good season under Allegri. It sounded like him and Pirlo have an up and down relationship. So I think this is going to work out pretty well for him.
What about the obvious name, the big name, Cristiano Ronaldo? He, I think, put out a statement not being particularly pleased with the way his future is being discussed. So we can keep that in mind or not. But what do you think happens with him this season?
Well, look, I've been saying all summer that it's really not up to Ronaldo what happens. I'm sure he would have been very happy to leave Juve. I think Juve would have been quite happy to save, because the annual cost to them of having Ronaldo between his wages and what's left of amortizing his transfer fee is like 80 million euros. I mean, it's massive. But I was like, I don't see any club who's going to want to invest that amount of money to bring in Ronaldo. So I think he has to feel very slighted that he was available all summer pretty much. And the second Messi is available, PSG swoop in and get it done. Now, look, there are reasons for that. There was no transfer fee with Messi. I don't think that's much of it. I mean, Juve would have been very happy to just save on his salary. Messi's a little bit younger, but look, I think that statement from Ronaldo yesterday, I think a lot of it comes from that. And going back to Real Madrid maybe didn't make the most sense, but I think he would have really liked to go to PSG. I know Mendes had tried to work something out, so I got to think for him, it's got to burn that Messi goes there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he can react. On one hand, he can sulk, not be too happy. On the other hand, he's also playing for his next contract. So, he has just 1 year left at Juve. So I think this is obviously going to be a very intriguing season for him. What's interesting is he scored a ton of goals at Juve, but Juve itself is not that they were scoring more goals with Ronaldo than before him. So a case can also be made. Can we really say that Juve's better with him or not? There are some things, it's small sample size. There's been some games without him where they looked quite fluid. So I'm very intrigued. But I will say for Serie A as a whole, with all the departures that we had, and look, in the transfer market, anything can happen. But as of August 18th, I'd be really shocked if he leaves. So I'm going to say for the sake of the league, maybe more so than Juve, it's very good that he's there, because he certainly brings eyeballs and interest.
Is there a chance that he also is a distraction this season, that if he is kind of concerned about his future, if he is maybe not an automatic starter, do you think he will be an automatic starter under Allegri?
Well, yeah, I think he will be a starter, and I think this is why it's very important for Juve to have Allegri. Maybe Ronaldo respected Pirlo as a player. I'm not sure he really respected him as a manager. I don't think Pirlo, especially on a short contract at Juve, on low salary for a manager, didn't have the cachet that Allegri now has on a long deal. He's the highest paid manager in Italy. The club obviously really backs him. Look, they'll be very sensitive to Ronaldo, I'm sure, because perception's reality. He's a powerful agent. There's a lot of reasons why Juve wouldn't want for this to go south. But I think having a manager like Allegri compared to a Pirlo makes a lot more sense. I think they'll be able to manage that better if it gets to that.
So we've talked about some teams that have a lot of change. Let's talk about some teams that have kept things relatively the same. Let's go to Atalanta, who brought in Christian Romero on a permanent deal. They also brought in Mera Demero on a loan. They added a goalkeeper. They brought in a center back. They added a left back. Is Gasperini telling us that he had concerns about their defense?
Yeah, I would say so. Look, Demiral is a controversial player, was very highly rated by a lot of Juve fans. It was pretty disastrous at the Euro. I thought last season at Juve didn't play particularly well. But he is somewhat of a similar profile to Romero, who, when he arrived at Atalanta, there was some hopes that he would do well, and then he ended up becoming one of the best defenders in the Serie A. I don't know if Demiral can get quite there, but they also bring in Lovato, who did very well at Verona, especially in the first half of the season. There was talk that Milan and clubs like that were looking to buy him in January. So, they make sense. They clearly upgraded at the goalkeeper position. Golini went to Spurs. I thought Golini was an above-average Serie A keeper, but Musso was one of the 3 best keepers in the league last season, and he's been very, very good for a while. So they clearly improved there. For a club like Atalanta, that can't spend a ton, spending 20 million cash money on a keeper, pretty significant, but they upgrade there. Part of me wishes maybe they went a little bit more in, because I look at the landscape of the league and I'm like, gosh, if a club like Atalanta is ever going to have a chance to win the Scudetto, this is it. And maybe they feel this way of the past 2 years. But they did improve. They have more depth. They held on to Ilicic. Let's see if Duvan Zapata goes to Inter. The thing with Atalanta is they're so deep up front. Muriel off the bench, mostly off the bench, had 20 goals. We saw Piscina at the Euro, how well he did. And there is this notion that Atalanta, it's more about the systems than the players. One of my best calls last year was like when Papu Gomez left, a lot of people thought the sky was falling at Atalanta. And I was like, no, I actually think this might not be that bad. And they actually even got better. So, I'm very high on Atalanta. I wish they had done maybe a little bit more. They kind of still lack a little options in midfield, but more backup. But we saw at the Euro, like Gosens and Mele Gosens on Germany and Mele on Denmark were some of the best wing backs at the Euro. They had brought in Mele in the January window. So, they are definitely a team to watch. I think they are looking really good to be in the top 4. And as we mentioned, they kept their manager. Only 2 of the top 7 teams did. And I think more people feel good about Atalanta, say, retaining Gasperini than Milan retaining Pioli, who deserve to stay, don't get me wrong. But I think it's fair to say, if you ask people, where does continuity help you more, I think you would pick Atalanta.
And Atalanta were a team this summer who I really enjoyed seeing people, like, I forget who it was, but multiple people tweeted something along the lines of, how come every time there's a really exciting player, I look up who they play for and it's Atalanta? And that does feel pretty accurate for some of the players they have. I am one of those people, though, who thought they would be in trouble because Papu Gomez was so important and had so much sort of variability to what he was asked to do and how he did it. But then they kept going and they were fine. Then there was the issue with Ilicic, and it seemed like he, too, was going that way of, like, he was a critical performer who now seems to be on the outs. It seems like he's going to move. I believe you just said it seems like he's actually there and seems happy. What's the latest with him? How have they kind of turned things around?
Yeah, so Ilicic was heavily linked to Milan. And I got to be honest, I was very surprised that the reaction from most Milan fans was not positive to being linked to Ilicic, which, even last season, when he's on, and look, he's been known for being very inconsistent, but Atalanta, he was much more consistent in the past. Like, even in March when he was on, I was like, this is as good a player as there is in Serie A, as impactful, even in the Champions League against tough oppositions. Ilicic absolutely holds his own. Like a lot of players, he's clashed with Gasperini, but it sounds like they made up. Gasperini wants his players to do a lot of defensive work too, and run a ton. Ilicic is kind of like the exceptions at the club. They call him Nonna. They make fun of him. They call him the grandmother because he doesn't want to work. He's pretty lazy and all. But they don't even really need him to be like a huge difference maker because we saw Piscina doing so well. Malinovsky was one of the best players in the second half of the season. And last year they bought Miranchuk, who didn't play a ton. He's a very talented player. So look, Atalanta's never going to have trouble scoring goals. They improved the defense. They have more depth in some rows. They're a little bit thin in the midfield, but I think they're ready to roll. And I think on any day they can beat any team in Serie A.
Speaking of that depth, Transfermarkt has it that they had 46 players return from loan, many of whom have been sent back out on loan. Is that number correct as far as you know? And if so, how do they have that many players?
It wouldn't totally shock me. They do have one of the best youth systems in Italy, and they use a lot of these players. I think they kind of see it as, let's throw a lot of stuff against the wall. Let's see what sticks. Kulusevski was a player that they had on loan. He absolutely exploded at Parma. They made an absolutely ridiculous profit on him that way. Diallo, who went to Manchester United, another player from their youth system. So, look, I'll take their word for Transfermarkt. That does sound like a lot of players, but I also know that is kind of their MO. They just have, a lot of cheap players that don't cost a lot to them, and they hope a few of them kind of break out and they can turn a profit on them.
And I'm looking at their Wikipedia page now, which does have an absurd number of players on loan, but it's worth noting that almost all of them are Italian, which does then maybe support your point that this is a team that sort of have that strong local academy and then sell some people on, make that money, and continue to perform well. We would expect them to have a strong season. I'm hoping they do. They are in the Champions League, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Whew. Good. All right. I like a world in which Atalanta are in the Champions League. And to be honest, I like a world in which Milan are good because it just feels like we're supposed to live in a world where Milan are strong and very good. Let's take a look at what they have done so far because I like it when they are good, even if I don't root for them. I don't know if they will be this season. I'm excited to hear what you have to say because their biggest departure, obviously, Donnarumma. We mentioned him earlier. I did have another Antonio Donnarumma joke here, but I feel like I've already sort of used that one. They've brought in a replacement keeper, Mike Magnan. I probably butchered that. I apologize, from Lille. They made Tomori's move permanent. Ditto Sandro Tonali. Brahim Diaz is back on loan. Mario Mandzukic walked out the large target striker door, and Olivier Giroud walked right back through it. What have you enjoyed about their business? What do you think they still need to do to be competitive this season?
So look, Milan, I think, are the team that spent the most in Serie A this summer. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to say they are better. So how did this happen? They had a ton of players on loan last season. Tomori, as you mentioned, Tonali. They had Dalot. They didn't bring him back. So they had to already figure out what to do with that. A lot of the money that they got from making the Champions League was spent on retaining Tomori, Tonali, and then replacing Donnarumma, who they lost for nothing. And I can't stress enough how losing two starters like Donnarumma and Çalhanoğlu for nothing would be incredibly challenging for any Serie A team because the cost of replacing them is pretty high. Now, Mike Magnan, I've heard good things, but, we're talking Donnarumma as one of the three best keepers in the world. Last season, Milan, I think, had the most clean sheets in Serie A. I think Donnarumma was a huge part of it. Now, granted, the positive is you're getting a full season of Tomori as opposed to just half of the season. So you can say, okay, we might be a little bit weaker at keeper, but we're going to be better at center back. So there's that. Çalhanoğlu, as I mentioned, very controversial player. I thought he was very good in the first half of the season, tailed off a little bit. To be fair to Milan fans, they were trashing him when he was there too. So it's not like they started trashing him only when he went to Inter. But I would also point out that while he was at Milan, they had three managers all three of them played him all the time. Pioli especially seemed to really rely on him. In that midfield, Benacer, Kessie, Çalhanoğlu together worked really well. They were maybe the best unit in Serie A last season. So as of now, let's see if they bring someone else in. Right now, it seems they are saying Brahim Diaz is going to have to make up for that. They're very different players. Brahim Diaz is much more offensive-minded. Let's say he doubles his production from last year. That goes to, I think, 8 goals and 8 assists. Good, not great. So I wish I was more optimistic about Milan, because I really think in Italian football we need a strong Milan and Inter. And last season, that's why the season was so engaging. Juve was a little bit down, but they were better. Them playing in the Champions League, great that they're back, but that's going to take some resources. They have 2 of their midfielders, Benacer and Kessie, are going to go play in the Africa Cup in January. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. If you wanted to look at the positive, I think Giroud, one of the best signings in Serie A this season. I think he's going to be really, really good for them. But, the more he plays, it means that Ibra isn't playing a ton, and he's been injured. We saw how important he is from Ibrahimovic. And last season, in my opinion, the strength of the team, aside from Theo Hernandez on the wing, which they still have, and with Hakimi gone, he's absolutely the biggest different make-guard wing back, was really how strong they were down the middle. They had Donnarumma, Kier, Tomori in the second half, Kessie, Benacer, Çalhanoğlu, Ibrahimovic. That was kind of like their backbone. That worked really, really well. And now you have Donnarumma, Çalhanoğlu gone, Ibrahimovic injured. I think out of all those, you can say, well, they definitely, Ibrahimovic replaced them the best with Giroud, and they still have Ibra. But I do think there are reasons for concerns. I would say of all the teams we talked about, Lazio and Milan are the ones that have the most work to do until the window closes. And the fact that Milan has already spent so much is going to make it hard. So they're going to have to get creative. I think we're going to see a lot of last-second moves, swaps, things like that. They do have Romagnoli, maybe is a player they can flip for something else. So they have more work to do. But I would say I see them, if you told me, are they closer to Atalanta, Inter, Napoli than, say, Roma, Lazio, who I kind of see in the next year? I think they're closer to Roma and Lazio.
And how likely is it that Stefano Pioli will be blamed if things don't go well?
Yeah, look, if you told me what's more likely, Milan finishes second again or Pioli gets sacked this season, I would say it's more likely Pioli. Look, he absolutely deserves to come back. He did everything that was asked of him. I think once Ibrahimovic extended, it almost was a fait accompli that he was staying, because him and Ibra developed a great relationship. And look, I think Milan are pretty steady. The other thing, though, is there really are a lot of good managers out there available. So if things go south, Milan could say, hey, we need a changer. So I would say of all the managers we've discussed so far, if there's a bet out there on the most likely manager to be sacked, Pioli would be my choice.
David, can we live in a world in which Milan get revenge for Inter taking Hakan Çalhanoğlu by Milan appointing Antonio Conte? Can we make that happen?
That would be great. And look, I think a lot of Milan fans would really, really love that. I think Conte, I don't think he'll come back this season. I don't see him as someone who wants to take over mid-season. I think if my guess is we're going to see him back in the Premier League at some point. I think he really wants to go back there.
Final question, since you've been so generous with your time, I don't want to take up too much more, but I did want to ask you about Venezia, who have been doing some signing of their own. They've got some Americans in there. I'm hoping for big things. What are your expectations for them?
So I think of all the newly promoted teams, they certainly had the most interesting window. Look, in addition to the American players, which is very exciting, and I've heard some good things about most of them, I think they could do quite well. They also bring in Caldara, who was a really highly rated defender not that long ago. Things didn't really work out for him at Juve and Milan, but look, at Venezia, he can really relaunch his career. Their manager, Zanetti, was not the former player. Another Zanetti did very well in Serie B, very highly rated. Spezia losing Italiano looked to me like a team that are in big trouble. I think Verona, who lost their manager, maybe didn't have a great replacement lined up. They're going to be in trouble. I do see a world where Venezia managed to stay up in Serie A. And look, kudos to them. The marketing that they've done, superb, not just, investing in the American market, which looks, has worked out well in Italy. You saw what they did with their jerseys. There's rightfully a lot of buzz for them. So good for them.
All right. Well, David Amael, good for you for knowing all of the things you know to make sense of this coming Serie A season. If people want to continue to hear from you, how can they do so? We will have you back on the show multiple times this season. Listeners, don't worry about that. But if they want to hear you in between those appearances, David, how can they do so?
Yeah, so you can hear me on Calcioland. We have a free episode every Friday on all platforms. We're going to have a big season preview coming Friday. We have an episode on Patreon, different things there. Sometimes you hear me on Sirius XM, and I look forward to doing shows with you again, Taylor. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoy chatting with you. I love the work that you do, so thanks so much for having me. All the best to you and the listeners, and I definitely look forward to doing this again.
Well, thank you very much, man. That's kind words. Listeners, thank you all very much. We will talk to you all again very soon.
This episode is brought to you by BetMGM. Sign up today with BetMGM, the exclusive betting partner of The Athletic, and get a $1,000 risk-free first bet. Plus, get a free 3-month subscription to The Athletic. Just sign up at BetMGM.com/TheAthleticPod, that's P-O-D, to take advantage of this special offer from the kings of sportsbooks. That's BetMGM.com/TheAthleticPod, P-O-D. New customer offer, paid in bonus dollars. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. Cue the disclaimer.
Must be 21 years of age or older to wager. Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia only. Excludes Michigan disassociated persons. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado, Nevada, and Virginia. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. In Tennessee, call or text the red line at 800-889-9789. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. Promotional offer not available in Nevada.